property manager in France was very different than here in Canada.
Okay.
It's almost like, it's a weird thing, it's a weird comparison, but it was like every time I spoke about our product, people thought that I was a property manager and not a property management software.
Right, guys, episode number 87. Francois, you're back in Canada and back on the podcast. How you
That's
feeling?
correct. I'm good. I'm good. I'm happy to be back in Toronto. It's been a while since I was gone. I think like 6, almost 8 months. So a lot has changed since with the pandemic and Enso Connect, myself, and pretty much everything. So
Absolutely. Yeah, we've been keeping in touch with your journey with over LinkedIn. You've been putting a lot of updates there, but since we reached out and we started connecting again, you let us know you've been quite busy, man, during COVID time. Last we talked, you were stuck in France, on mid lockdowns. You're originally from France, but you're telling us how you want to get back home, get back into the startup grind. But how's it been working remotely and getting things done remotely?
yeah, so it's been challenging for sure. So when we last spoke, I think it was back in March or something, and France had just gotten into lockdown. So it was a really strict lockdown, no going out. I was
Yeah.
stuck in my parents' place, and it was a bit tough to adapt from like a working environment with my co-founder and our team to suddenly, COVID-19. We're in the travel industry, and it seems like everything's just going downhill from there. I think the first 2 months were probably the toughest part, figuring out what we were going to do, if we were going to completely pivot the product, if I was going to come back to Toronto anytime soon. But eventually we sort of adapted. Like it was like, yeah, it was just a lot of research, a lot of Zoom calls and Skypes and Hangouts until we figured out where we're going with things.
Yeah, definitely. Last time we spoke, like when you first came on, you talked about how amid lockdown in France, like people were not allowed outside without like proper
Hmm.
documentation. You had to print out a form and like to state the purpose of why you're outside and things
Yeah.
like that. How long were you dealing with all that in France? Like, what was your journey like?
So I think so. It started off with like 2 months of that. It
Hmm.
went up until I think May 11th, and then they started sort of letting people go out a bit more. And I actually took advantage of that time to start traveling again, but not travel, around the world for fun, but more so for work and identifying different opportunities.
Hmm.
So I noticed that like it went from really strict to really not strict.
Hmm.
And now it's back to being strict because, well, France is just paying the consequences of, I think, making things a bit too loose for the summer of 2020.
Yeah.
But I still see the difference, and if anything, I see the difference now that I'm back in Toronto of how people handle COVID and lockdown and the seriousness of it. Where I find there's a much bigger social pressure here in Canada to abide by lockdown rules,
Mm.
even though the rules themselves are less strict. Whereas in France, there's sort of that revolutionary mentality of, you know, we're not going to follow what the government says, and therefore the government puts these really, strong restrictions because they know people would just not respect them. So very different, but it was also, I think, a great learning experience to see the cultural differences in, well, the business that I'm running, essentially the home management platform that we're building, and how that applies to different types of hosts. One of the key things that I noticed when I was there, so I was going out meeting a few people, or off Zoom primarily, but in some cases also in person, respecting socially distanced measures. And I noticed that the term property manager in France was very different than here in Canada.
Okay.
It's almost like, it's a weird thing, it's a weird comparison, but it was like every time I spoke about our product, people thought that I was a property manager and not a property management software. And the
Hmm.
reaction to it was sort of like, oh, another one. And that's because in Europe, there are just so many boutique property management firms, or hotel systems, if you will, management people, if you will. So it was really interesting to discover a whole new market that I was familiar with culturally. Let's say I just knew about, I know France, I'm from there, et cetera, but I didn't know this specific industry and the impact it has in the country. So
Hmm.
good experience so far.
Yeah, so Europe has like a lot more like independent owners, right? When it comes to hospitality, right? Like there's more like the bed and breakfast kind of environments, right? Like or specialty or hospitality services.
Yeah, so I mean, there's been a big shift. There's been a big
Mm,
shift in terms of how we've adapted the product. Initially, we were focused on building out this property management software for individual homeowners, automating the entire process from check-in to getting the cleaning team. And now what we've realized is our niche isn't property management systems as a whole, but rather a very strong communication tool. So what our pitch essentially changed from, hey, we have a tool to help you automate everything, to,
hmm
hey, we're going to help you lower your operational costs all while maintaining your inventory. And the biggest problem these property managers were facing, whether they're small or large scale, was that they're getting just as many inquiries on their properties. They just don't have the manpower to answer all of the messages. And so they seem
mm,
unresponsive or not professional enough. When in fact, it's just that, they've had to cut their team in half because of COVID and not getting enough bookings. So they're getting all the messages, but they're not actually following through with the booking because of the pandemic. So we decided to find a way to help them out with that. And Enso's essentially sort of pivoted from being a, let's say, full scale, one stop shop property management system to a really narrowed down focused communication platform that leverages smart home devices and our own chatbots and scheduled messages, unified inbox, and so on.
hmm
It's not a pivot, it's a refocus, if you will, but it's been helpful to sort of have that focus so that we're not jumping around different avenues and we really know where we're going.
No, definitely. So let's talk a little more about that pivot, right? Like, does that come from, again, more customer insights, talking to customers, or was it a shift that happened in the market because of COVID, right? Like, how much
Yeah,
was it influenced by either?
I think it's two then one, meaning it's the shift happened because of the pandemic, which affected customers and therefore affected us. So we
Hmm
were in chat with homeowners and property managers, and we found ourselves being a bit tone deaf, trying to sell a PMS system, a property management software. That's what it stands for in the industry.
Yeah.
And so we're out there trying to sell this, and we find ourselves being a bit tone deaf because, well, the primary concern they have is how am I going to get guests. And so I had homeowners message me being like, what I could do for you is if you rent out my property for the year. And I'm like, no, 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 that's not what we do. We're not a Saunders model. We're not trying to do some swaps with rentals and things like that. But I think where it crystallized was we had a conversation with a company called Leaftown that actually I think got us to the next step. So they're bringing on all of their units from one of our competitors, IGMS, onto us. And they also invested about half of the pre-seed round. We don't disclose publicly the amount, but
hmm
they essentially raised or invested half of that round in us. So they really believed in what we were doing, especially from the communication standpoint. We were still going in with the direction of, well, we're going to focus on communication right now, but we're looking to do all of these different things. And over time, as we've been working with them literally every single day with their account managers, building out the tool, seeing how they want it to work, we've noticed that there's actually a niche just on the communication that could be expanded even further. We
mm
don't need to go out and develop accounting tools and dynamic pricing systems and things like that. We can let that flow with other companies. Let's focus on building out this one specific communication platform. And so very much customer driven. And the reason it's customer driven is because of the impact of COVID. Um, that operational costs I was mentioning, these clients are essentially, they had 20, 30 people managing 50, 100,000 units, and they can only afford to have five now. And they
Yeah.
still need to manage those units. They don't want to lose on that inventory. So we come in and help them automate that. And it's been an interesting sort of shift in mentality because it feels like a smaller problem, but it's not. It's just as big of a problem. It's just more focused, if anything.
hmm No, definitely. So it seems like you spend a lot of this time talking to customers, getting direct feedback. Now, those customers, has it been the end customers, people who actually, like what do they look like? Are they independent people, who own second, third properties? Are they property management groups, larger conglomerates of like of corporate, corporate funded clientele? Is it REITs? Like what do they
Yeah.
look like?
So there's a lot of different facets to the type of customers that we've been looking at and speaking with. I mean, we're talking about individual homeowners. There's, the guy who has a home he's renting on Airbnb, all the way to your, medium-sized property management companies, large-scale property managers that have built internal systems, property managers that use external systems, or even property management systems themselves. So we've been really looking at everyone on that scope to see where we fit best. And currently, I feel like our niche is actually on those large scale property managers that have built internal systems and realize they cannot go further than that. They can't scale more. They can't develop that technology. They don't have the resources for it. They're not getting the money for it. So we're targeting them primarily, but that doesn't mean we're not looking at individual homeowners and smaller property managers. We still want to keep those conversations going, because the way I see it is the homeowner to the large scale enterprise property manager is just an evolution in time. Everyone started off as a homeowner, and then eventually, for those who had that ambition, became a large scale property manager. So I think it's actually important to keep those conversations going with those small homeowners, because you don't know. Maybe in 5 years, they're going to have 150,000 units, and you're going to be glad that you kept those conversations going, right? You also realize different problems that these different skilled companies have or individuals have. Your small property manager, he might have a tough time communicating basic information like Wi-Fi, how to get in, things like that, because he has a high turnover. Whereas your large scale property manager may have automated parts of that communication, but is having a tougher time organizing the clients and in a sales funnel, and figuring out, so different problems, different types of customers. We're still exploring that. But right now we are focused in selling this at what I like to call mega clients. So people who bring 50,000 or more units and are trying to update their tech stack, if you will, to help automate that. So it's been fun.
Definitely. I should have mentioned it before, but maybe you should give us a walkthrough of your new system if you're able to.
Absolutely. Well, I'd give you a walkthrough right now, but I'd only be able to give you a QA thing. So if anything, I'll send you guys a live demo or like a demo video for you to play around and see how it works.
Yeah.
But so far, it's the platform has definitely changed. I think there's a lot of updates to do in terms of design personally, but the team that's using it, it's live now. The company that is using it seems to be happy for the time being with the designs and the features. So we're excited to see how that changes.
So what have the challenges been for you? Has it been talking to the customer and understanding what the market's been? Has it been the product, developing a technology tool? Like you're not a technical founder yourself, right? You had to learn these skills. You are.
I am. Yeah. I graduated at U of T in computer science and cognitive science, but I'm no longer necessarily doing much of the tech. I help manage. My co-founder is really like the go-to guy for this.
Gotcha.
We've gone from a couple lines of code to millions of lines of code, and at this point, I wouldn't necessarily be able to tell you where everything is at. Yeah, I think so. It's been different problems we faced every month. I found this graph the other day. A friend sent me this meme, and it was like, the life of an entrepreneur. And it was like just up and down, up and down, up and down. And that's exactly what we experienced over the past 6 months. Some days you're like, this is over. Let's stop this. Let me go get a real job like all my other friends and stop this nonsense. And then the next day you're like, wait a minute, this actually might be a new direction. So it's a real adventure, let's put it that way. In terms of the problems that we were facing, well, back in March, the biggest problem we were facing was fundraising. We'd raised just a bit of money from a creator fund, but not enough to really get us anywhere, just enough to keep operations going for the next 6 to 8 months, stretching ourselves a bit thin. But we managed to successfully raise that amount. The next step was, identifying the sort of roadmap of building out the product, meeting deadlines. We had a few issues there of identifying what we could do in which sort of time frame. You build something out, there's bugs, you didn't anticipate for those bugs, you're delayed by a couple weeks. So that was sort of the second problem. I think right now, I don't want to say there's no problem. There are always problems, and that's the beauty of entrepreneurship, is you're constantly solving new problems. A month ago, the problem we were facing was hiring. So finding the right talent, QA engineer. We were looking for someone to help us continuously test the platform. And I think right now, the biggest challenge is locking in our next big whale. So we are out there messaging, 40, 50 and property managers every single day, and just having as many conversations as we can to sort of see where this first deal is leading us to and what's the next opportunity, because we will be looking into fundraising again in a couple months. So it's very cyclical. It's like 6 months fundraising, 6 months product, at least on my end, my job. It's like, I shift every 6 months from one to another. So yeah, the next challenge, not problem, but challenge would be, getting that confirmation from this next big client. And we have a few leads, but we're still in the process of negotiating and talking about how we integrate with their tech stack and so on.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like you're divvy up a trifecta of responsibilities, right? Product being chief, like how to design the product better, how to better make the user experience better, how to make it tailored better for what the clients want, and then two is again growth, right? How to get more people on the platform, how to get more users, and the third being the fundraising,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Shifting back and forth. How has developing skill sets for that been? Right? Like, where have you gotten those skills from?
Yeah. So when I first started, I once again I came from a technical background, but I loved pitching. I loved presenting things and projects, and I'd done some hackathons and things like that. So, but not enough to really be where I'm at now. And I think there's two or three directions to it. One, I joined a Master's of Entrepreneurship at the University of Cambridge, and that's been tremendous help in sort of crystallizing and formalizing some of that help. How do I raise money? I thought it was just send a pitch deck, get a check, right? 2 steps, done. Turns out there's a couple more steps to it,
Hmm.
due diligence and all sorts of different things around it. So parts of it was my master's, which really helped sort of create that business side of things. The second one would be, I'd say, just self-taught. You learn, you try, you fail, you learn again. It's you just all about trying, failing, and stepping up from that. Reading books. I highly recommend the Lean Startup, Thinking Fast and Slow, or Thinking Slow and Fast. I always forget which one it is, but uh, and reading books about how startups have grown, and then also recently the Founders Factory. So we joined an accelerator in the UK, one of the UK's top accelerators called Founders Factory, and I think that has shifted us from being a project, if you will, to a real company. We're
Mm.
setting up objectives. We have a hiring plan. We have specific metrics on onboarding people and how to do that, creating a culture and values and visions and missions, like really setting us up to be two guys in a garage building something to a real team building a product with countless people supporting. So
Yeah, I remember seeing that update. So you went from living in France, and then you went over the pond to London.
so I didn't actually go. I didn't physically go. No. So I stayed in France. When I said I traveled, going from around France, I
Okay.
wanted to stay close to my family. I did drop to Italy quickly because there was a few property managers I wanted to get in touch with, and it was easy to travel there. But I didn't unfortunately get the chance to go back to the UK and lock that deal in person. So it was all done remotely. But I had met the guys from Founders Factory through the Creator Fund back in March. So Creator Fund invested March 7th of
Hmm.
2020.
Sorry, what is
And
the
they're,
Creator Fund?
yeah, so I don't know if do you know Front Row Ventures in Toronto?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so they're like a student-led firm, except they're not led by students. They're led by Jamie McFarland, who's an actual proper VC,
Hmm.
but they have an army of students that go out and do deal flow and so on. And so it's a really interesting model. Their Creator Fund is the European equivalent of Dorm Room Fund in the U.S. or Front Row Ventures in Canada, and they're backed by Founders Factory. So when I'd gone and visited them, I think back in March or earlier than that, January, really before COVID was on my radar. I had met a few of the people from Founders Factory, including their head of investment, Dylan, who's actually who comes from Toronto. So he's back in Toronto now.
Hmm.
So I'd met a few of them in person then, but I didn't get the chance over the summer to catch up again. So we've been doing everything remotely, unfortunately. Still getting value out of it.
Yeah, I mean, jumping like people like generally go from incubator to incubator. Like I remember, like there was a time where you like kind of like step like it was like a leapfrog event, right? Go from incubator to an accelerator to a better accelerator, and you move forward.
Yeah,
But now, like there seem to be very specialty incubators and accelerators that focus on a very small and a very like niche categories, and
yeah,
people kind of join them for that purpose, right?
yeah,
And the innovation in ecosystem has kind of drastically changed. How's
absolutely.
navigating that? Like how like was the deciding factor to go to Founders Factory? Was it because you were recommended to go there by somebody? Did you research that beforehand and you're like, oh, they developed a set of skills that were really needed? How's navigating that look like?
Yeah, so back when we made that decision, or before making the decision, so we had just gotten a message from Y Combinator saying we were scheduled for an interview, and so we were really excited about that. And then we also had Founders Factory that was really interested. And what we realized was Y Combinator was much more fundraising focused, whereas Founders Factory was much more operational focused. So I knew a few founders who'd gone through YC, raised on large valuation, 10 million plus, things like that. And it's great. You get the money, you lower your equity position. You don't lower your equity position too much. It's amazing. And they do a great job of that. But, with the recent turn of events, I've also seen a lot of founders that weren't able to sustain those valuations, and it ends up just not being the right direction. Now, bear in mind, we did go through the interview process of Y Combinator. We unfortunately didn't make it past that. So, everything I'm saying is to be taken with a grain of salt. I've never actually been through the Y Combinator process. But that was sort of our decision. We realized, okay, and this is before we had been rejected. We were still in the process of making that decision. We decided, well, let's leverage Founders Factory because they're operational focus. We just raised money. We're not looking to raise any more money. The goal here is to grow the business, to get from a few homes to a few thousand to a few 100,000 homes, not just to raise money. I think when it comes to picking out an accelerator, I totally agree with you. I think there's niche accelerators, incubators in different fields. I think it really depends on where you want to grow, how you want to grow. Like if you're looking at, I don't know, I know Toronto, I think Techstars has this thing for prop tech that's really good if you're looking to stay in North America and grow from there. But if you want to start sort of exploring the European market, well, that's where Founders Factory might be a good bridge, especially being in the UK, to open those doors in Europe. So we made our decision based on the fact that they were operationally focused. The team was excited about our product, but also sort of had very specific plans as to how to help us grow. Like it wasn't just, join our accelerator, they give you money, you join and nothing happens. Like we have weekly meetings and monthly meetings with the whole team, and we have full support where they don't just tell us what to do, but they actually do things as well for us. That's where I was like, okay, great. It's like you're increasing your team, even though they don't work for you, they're essentially working for you in most cases. So that was our decision. And then the funds, obviously, as well. And the recognition factor, getting into these accelerators is always a great boost for PR and asserting what you're doing.
No, definitely. Have you ever checked out Kohler's International? They have a prop tech incubator.
That's the one I was, so that's the one I was referring to. The prop tech here in Toronto. I think isn't it managed by Techstars, or it was founded by Techstars?
I'm not sure.
That's exactly what I was mentioning. Yeah.
I think there's one where Colliers is involved in, but they also have an internal in-house one that they run and manage. I remember one of the manager of that manager, I think Ari, he came on our show last year and he was talking about it, how like a giant enterprise like Colliers, they're becoming more incubator focused, where they're working with these incumbent property technology companies. And it works better for them to work with these innovation, like smaller companies that are innovating at a ground level, and guiding them through that process using their own capabilities, because they can mix their commercialization capabilities, the smaller companies' invention of like a new ways of doing things, and then together they're creating innovation together, right? The way they described it is like, it makes sense why more and more large-scale enterprises are becoming more incubation focused, right? Rather than traditional R&D of creating things in-house, they are opening up their doors to work with smaller and smaller companies and helping them grow and making investments, making strategic partnerships, even buying them out. It seems to be a more strategic way. Like when it comes in that kind of point of view, like, do you see yourself ever partnering with like a larger prop tech company or a property management firm, or even like working in-house with them?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're essentially doing that, not necessarily through the accelerator, but with our current customer. That's exactly pretty much what we're doing. And I think one of the things that you mentioned so accurately is the fact that these accelerators that are being backed by large name companies. In our case, Founders Factory is backed by L'Oreal, EasyJet. These big players. I think the reason is these accelerators become like a testing ground for innovation, right? Of intelligent people in a room, you tell them fix different problems, and they do it. And it's sometimes better than having to build the team in-house. One, you're saving a lot of money, you're giving them creative freedom. And if it's really great for your company, then eventually you've created a sort of a channel for you to potentially acquire them, since you're essentially invested in them already. So it's a smart model for sure. For us, the value added wasn't necessarily having EasyJet as one of Founders Factory's partners and things like that. We're not necessarily in the airline But the fact that they're able to get these kinds of connections is important because it just opens the doors to new conversations, new property managers. Yeah, and in terms of like, us being directly in partnership with these large scale companies, I mean, absolutely, that it's maybe not right now. We're doing this with one client. We're focused on that at this stage, but it is definitely part of the roadmap to continue these conversations, continue these potential partnerships with those large scale companies.
Yeah, for sure. Do you follow Scott Galloway at all from L2
Why
Inc?
does that ring a bell?
Yeah,
Scott
Scott
Galloway?
Galloway, I talk about him a lot because dude's become like like my new Joe Rogan almost, right? He's a professor at NYU. He has his own marketing firm. He's gotten really famous over the years. But one of the things he's coined during COVID is he's calling this period, the financial period, the Great Dispersion. And what he's
Okay.
seeing is that you're seeing a lot of transfers of wealth, or transfers of movements to technology, right? And part of that is you're seeing a dispersion from the greatest financial assets in the world, which is commercial real estate, moving into the second largest financial asset in the world, which is residential real estate, right?
Mm,
Especially since all these commercial buildings are being underutilized, people are working from home more, right? We went from a environment where 4% of workers on average worked remotely to now 40% are working remotely,
yeah.
right? And so literally like the wealth is being sucked out of the commercial real estate assets and into residential homes, where people are they're moving out of downtown cores, they're moving into larger scale homes, propping up the industry for like smaller townships now, right?
Yeah.
You've seen the exodus from Silicon Valley into smaller places like Nashville. Well, Nashville's not that small, but but like people who have traditionally gone to like these larger cities to create companies or to work in professional environments, or they're
Yeah.
going to a smaller town environments, or and it's like you're seeing a dispersion of people going from these cores and taking their talents and their resources and their networks with them,
Yeah.
right? So like part of that is a new cultural it's actually reversing the culture divide, right? It used to be that if you wanted to do anything great or do anything big, you move to a city, right? It's like
Mm.
location,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
Like being close to where the action is, by association you get some action out of it yourself, right? You're more likely to.
Absolutely.
But that's shifted,
Yeah.
right? The co-founder of AngelList, he talked about this as well. He talked about the factor of like technology, especially the internet, is actually culturally regressing us, right? Because the fact that we're connected everywhere and we are more likely to become freelancers and more ethereal working relationships, it's almost like rather than the rush of people going into cities and like joining these large corporations, being a cog in a machine that's taken care of, but you work a job for 30-40 years and like you develop this craft in this very specialized niche, right? And you specialize. Now people are more forced to become generalists, right? And become
Yeah.
more freelance models where you're culturally it's almost like you become like a hunter gatherer, like
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
like you're forced to hunt your for your kill. You're like you're for your job, for like a gig, for a freelance position, or a temporary ethereal position, right? So culturally, we're regressing, as well as even though technology is growing, right? It's like it's breaking apart the molds that cities has put us into, which is you be a specialized worker, you live in this specialized environment, in a highly urbanized environment,
That's true.
right? So what I'm really interested in is the cultural changes that's happening here. But part of that cultural change that it's driving it is a new financial change, right? As residential real estate picks up and things move forward, like what does that look like from from a business analyst point of view, right? Like you're probably looking into these kind of things. Like what are the trends right now that are happening? Like are there hotspots picking up right now? That are particularly interesting for people looking to invest into real estate. Is there any trends that are becoming more notable, right? What are you seeing? What's exciting?
Yeah. 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 Well, so like one of the key things. So I just moved out of my old place, a little shoebox apartment I had in Toronto, to a slightly bigger shoebox. And one of the reasons is because we've seen right now in Toronto rent prices go down. You can go back to like sort of the 2014, 2015 prices that we had. And part of that is what I've noticed, or I mean, what people have noticed is, first of all the students that graduate that start a job and wanted to move downtown, be in that financial core and work around, their office and be around their office 24/7. They're realizing, well, I can work from home, so I'm going to go back to mom and dad, and that way I don't have to pay rent. I'm saving money, and eventually I'll be able to purchase a home or invest in real estate. That's sort of a lot of my friends have been thinking that way. A lot of people I know have been thinking that way. This creates sort of a void in these cities, these ghost cities, if you will, with condos that are empty and so on. Look at, they're coming out with a potential tax, vacant units, things like that, to sort of push people to come back in the cities. I don't know what the direction of that is, but where I've analyzed, I don't necessarily look at it necessarily just from a real estate perspective, but from a travel real estate perspective. It sort of leveled the playing field in the sense that people still want to travel. People still want to go out and change sort of where they're at. They're just not going to go all the way to, Cancun or Cuba or things like that. They're probably just going to go to Muskoka up north, or a cottage, or drive to the next town over. And so they're looking for places in these different hubs, no longer the sort of major cities. I haven't necessarily seen an influx of people from towns coming into cities, and that's probably because of the fear around the pandemic being sort of centrally located in large, cities. But that effect, that reverse effect of having, hotels, essentially, not even condos, they're just straight up buildings that are filled with short-term rentals, are now just sort of disappearing. And instead we're seeing these sort of new experiences, these new homes appear in different areas. It's just a different trend. It shows that people still want to travel. They've just adapted to it. And I think to push it even further, because of the whole work from home thing, people are not only looking for a bigger place because they realize, I need a place to work, and let's at least make it my home. I'm saving on commute, on my morning Starbucks or whatever other delicacies you spend too much money on, well, now you can spend that on rent or whatever it is. But also people thinking of like being nomads, working 3 weeks or a month in one home in Muskoka, and then working a month in Calgary, and working a month there, and moving around in the same area but in different homes, just to get different experiences. So I wouldn't be able to say, it's one way or another way that the shift is happening, but I think there's new models of real estate that are occurring because of this. And one great one I want to point out is Key Living, which, one of our advisors, Daniel Dubois, is president of, and he has a whole new model of home ownership that's coming out, and I think it's really unique for this current period of the pandemic. So I won't dive into it too much, because myself, I don't understand the complexities of it well enough. But instead of renting or just buying, maybe look into Key Living, which is a new way of owning homes, a new way of dealing with real estate. So.
Yeah, I mean, more like what you're talking about, like the idea of being a nomad and being ethereal. Like, I feel like there's a shift, or like a certain like need now for the labor force dynamics to change, right? Where for the 20th century, it was all focused on the employer first model, right? The employer has most of the power. Unions were built to like counter employer power, but generally the employers set the jobs, set the roles. Say this is how much it's worth to me, and then that drives the labor force. Whereas previously, there's these things where like labor unions or labor guilds, right, where highly specialized workers would form these communities, and they focus together on crafting their abilities together, right, and sharing knowledge. And then people who want those special skill sets would hire the guild or hire the union, and then they would task the people. Like the electricians union is one of the best examples of this. They still follow this principle, right? If you're a unionized electrician, the union gets you jobs, it guarantees you jobs, right? And most of like the high-end construction jobs, or the employers hires the union, right? Hires it, and they find the right person, right? And they shift through it, and they have seniority levels. The senior people are paid more, and like they're given the more lucrative ones, and the beginner ones are put through their paces and tested, right? And the labor force there is different, right? And I feel like there's a sudden pressure, and there's a potential for the labor force to kind of regress to almost to that kind of point of view, right? Where like if you can imagine, like if you're like a UX designer, and you're a nomad, right? You have this collective community of digital producers, right? And together collectively, you do one work, but like the work is like filtered down from that. So So companies can hire this collective, right? And then the work will filter down from there, and people kind of pick up gigs or within that stuff, or they do collective things together. But then the profits are kind of dispersed amongst them, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
subsidized into living standards and accessibility and training and tools and stuff like that, right? That's kind of shifting. So like, like, do you ever see like that, like, and we're seeing this, right? We're seeing more and more collectives actually forming. The actual the term collective being used, or cooperatives being used for these kind of things. Do you ever see like the need for real estate combining with that, where like real estate, like, like the labor force would be like, you know what, you can, here are like, digital houses, and in California these kind of things exist, right? Like there are a few models, a few companies playing with this model where like you're part of this membership model, and part of that membership means you can live in any one of these membership communities. So you can just travel, pick up your bags, go to a different place, and call that place home. And it's all a like-minded community, all paying into the same kind of benefits and services. And you can travel around and work along, and it's kind of a shared resource.
No,
Have you seen the models before?
yeah, yeah, I've seen models like that, and I think it's a terrific idea. I don't think it's necessarily sustainable to,
Hmm.
you doing that for the rest of your life. I think it's a great way for a certain demographic of people, a certain age, et cetera, group to do. Like my age, I would totally do that,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't see it as a winner takes all. It's going to replace the entire real estate industry. We're not going
Mm.
to see your classic white picket fence home. I think there's different facets. People have different comfort levels that the pandemic has created. Some people are finding themselves much more comfortable being, in their home with their family, somewhere like that. Other people want to create that sort of digital nomad lifestyle. But to bring back on the topic of these groups and in the workforce specifically, I think one thing to keep in mind, though, is the importance, and this is something I really learned over the past couple of months. And even though I knew about it and everyone told me how important it was, I didn't actually experience it until recently. And it's the importance of culture in a company.
Mm.
And so the issue I find with these collectives of talent, where it's sort of outsourced, quick labor, you get some logos done or a website done, et cetera, is you don't actually work with enough people to create a real team and solve real problems together. Now, I see it as three different ways. Either we go all contractors and everyone's contractor for everything. There's no more employees in the rest of the world. Everyone's contracting for their own work. We find a balance, which I think is being pushed more on the contractor side, which is fine. So like a more senior team of people that are doing, the thinking, the problem solving, and then the more junior side of contractors that are actually
Hmm.
doing some of the more the manual work, if you will,
Right.
or back to how it was before COVID. You had your employees, they come into the office. And I think the number two is the real shift and the importance of collectives in terms of employees, where it's good to have those collectives. It creates a group of people that can share resources, but it's also important for them to realize that they need to be part of a culture. If that culture is that freelance group or whatever it may be, fine, but if you're looking to work full time on a project, it's important to be part of the culture of that project. And so to tie that to, I know I'm shifting from one to the other, but to
Hmm.
tie that over real estate side of things, it's a great idea, I think, to create these collectives of real estate where you can travel in this similar groups. But it's also important to recognize that, you can't be associated just to one group. You need to go out and explore new ones. And so the best way for you to do that is to get out of your comfort zone and just step out and not be too stuck in a collective.
Yeah.
Um, so it's a balance. It's a balance. It's
Hmm.
identifying yourself with a group, all while keeping an eye open for other opportunities and other groups and so on. But
No,
no, I've
absolutely.
seen the model. I've seen the real estate model though of those things. I love it. I
Yeah.
think it's really cool.
No, definitely. Going back on that, like, being an entrepreneur, being a innovator, going through these incubators and accelerators, what do you feel about that kind of model being applied to us, right? To like, instead of like these ethereal incubators where you go in and and you get, you figure out some kind of task or help you with a certain part of your journey, right? Like one of the models that there's been a lot of the research and thought about is like, why do companies, especially startups, need to be focused on becoming like its own independent entity, right? If the product is so good or so innovative, can change, can there be a collective force behind it, you know? So imagine the same kind of collective environment for entrepreneurs or innovators, right? Where they have all these resources, all these incubators, specialized hubs, real estate involved for them. Do you feel like there could ever be a model where rather than being a completely like model where you're a company, you're founders and you're launching a completely separate vehicle, you're part of a collective of innovators and you're launching multiple products under that collective together, and you can leverage the power of the collective entrepreneurship community or innovator community to launch this thing out together. And you as a founder would ultimately can deleverage your risk. So even if your project or product fails, you're still taken care of by the other projects, other things being launched out there.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's the concept. The small scale of that is the advisory role, essentially. That a lot of building an advisory board, your advisors, that's exactly what they're doing. And I'm looking at actually join a few teams like that on the advisory side, and it's you're diversifying your investments in a way, and your investment being the time that you spend with these companies. And same goes with my board of advisors. They're diversifying their portfolio. They're investing in different types of companies and spending time with those different types of companies. But in terms of ownership, I think it's important to still have that clear structure, because decisions need to be made. And advisors and groups like that, you can't always come up with a unified decision, which might create some further tension. So I think what you're describing, if anything, is a amplified version of an advisory board, and not to reduce it or anything. I think it's awesome. I think that's exactly how it is. And the way I see it is this: entrepreneurs need to help each other out. We're all facing similar problems in a way: fundraising, product development, growing a team, finding developers, and all of these problems everyone's facing. So the best way to do that is to help each other out. Now, I find that with my advisors and the other entrepreneurs I hang out with. I had a buddy of mine refer a engineer who now works with us, right? He couldn't afford him anymore, so we took on his role. It's about sharing. It's about creating that sort of system amongst founders. And one of the downsides of the pandemic is it has halted a lot of events that were targeting that sort of, cohesion amongst entrepreneurs and groups. But I think people have handled it differently, in the sense that they're being a bit more proactive and going out, not just going to an event and, oh, I met someone, but rather, going out and messaging people to create those conversations. So it's for what you're referring to, I think it's an interesting topic to see if it would be able to have a pool of friends that build different startups and all kind of help each other out. But I'd be scared that there'd be a loss of focus, where you're working on too many things and they all become hustles more than projects. Not that there's any problem with a hustle. It's how you make money. Why not? But
this is a thought experiment that I ran with a few other entrepreneurs, right? And I was asking them this, like how do you deleverage risk, right? Think about it, if it's one thing to be in your 20s and and hustling and grinding, right? But later in life, when you have family, when you have a mortgage due, and so one of the things we're experiencing is that we see more of a fandom around entrepreneurship, right? We see this whole pop culture phenomenon, right? Entrepreneurs are it's a counterculture of today, right? Just like the 70s it was the hippies, and in the 90s it was the rock and roll bands, right? We're the counterculture, and so it's become cool now. But yet the risk of entrepreneurship is too high because cost of living standards are too high, and if you actually see the growth curve of innovators, right, it's actually at an all-time low since the 70s. It's actually been a downward spiral, even though you hear more about it and you hear more success stories and you hear more people doing it. You're more likely to find more people doing it now, mostly because of the internet. It's actually less people are able to do it because life has gotten expensive, risks are gone up, right? So the question is how do you create either a financial instrument or some kind of tool that can network entrepreneurs to provide a de-risking environment, almost like an insurance, right? It's how can I put all my time and effort into this, right? Some people, there's a few funds that does this, right? As an entrepreneurship fund, I forgot what the name of it is. Entrepreneurs voluntarily donate 5% of the company into this fund, and what you buy out of that is an insurance. Right, so you collectively, everyone who buys into this collectively owns the entire pool, and you're buying a piece of it.
Oh,
So
wow.
if 1 in 10 or 2 in 10 of these companies, make it, and 8 or 9 of them fail, or like in like 3 years, 5 years,
Yeah,
whenever, because that's the average, right? Well, the growth of that one company can feed the rest, right?
that's
To
that's
make up for the
interesting.
time and effort we put into it, right? Because my experience myself, I founded 3 companies before I came to this one, and after a certain time, after you exit your 20s, especially, it's like the risk goes higher and higher because like you have less disposable time, less just resources to throw at it, and you got to thinking about more than yourself, right? Taking care of your parents, that significant other that you're taking, you need to close the loop with, buying assets, moving on in life, just appearances, all that stuff just comes into effect, right? So the deleveraging of risk, right? I think
Yeah,
it's a big factor nowadays, right? Have you put any thought into this? Have you
100%.
experienced this?
Well, I mean, the thing is, I'm in my 20s. I'm in my
Mhm.
early 20s. So for me, it's like I'm taking this risk now because the way I see it is, if I want to get a job later, I'll figure that part out. But for now, this is the best thing I can do with my time. But I understand the risk factor, and I'm always I find it really humbling when I see, people who are later in the stages of their life and starting something, and they are taking a much bigger risk than I am. Because for me on my CV, if this doesn't work out, I can just, I know friends who've taken 2 year sabbaticals and they get a job at a great company, right? Well, I
Mhm.
didn't do 2 years on vacation. I spent 2 years trying to build something that didn't work out, whatever, right? But if you're
Definitely.
spending, you're in your 30s, you've got a family, you've got a wife, you've got, that's where it becomes a bit more complicated. I totally agree. Now, the insurance model that you're saying, I find that really interesting. Although I could see it as a bad signal for investors if they see that, because then they
Mm.
might think, oh, you don't think this
You
is
got a
going to
safety
work
net.
100%. So I could see the hesitation there, but I think it's an interesting model. And in terms of like, you know, what you mentioned about the sort of fan of being an entrepreneur, that is huge. I mean, I know there's so many real and there's so many fake entrepreneurs, and I hate to say it because in a way, being a self-starter is being an entrepreneur. So if you're self-starting anything, you are an entrepreneur. But a lot of people aren't solving any problems, and if you're not solving a problem, you're not really bringing any solutions. You might be doing something that people are interested in, and it might work, it might not work, but if you're not solving a real problem, something that's enough of a need for people to want, I wouldn't consider that necessarily entrepreneurship. And then
Mm.
there's a lot of people who jump from a lot of projects.
Yep.
I know a few people like that who will do, CEO of this 2 months later, CEO of that 2 months later, CEO. It's like, oh my goodness, what are you working on?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so and that's the excitement. That's the sort of jack of all trades, trying new things. So I'm not criticizing that sort of mentality, because it's good. You're trying to find your niche, but there's also a point where you need to focus and figure out what you're trying to solve. So striking a balance there. And I know I'm regressing totally on the question here, but just back to what was this company that you were mentioning, the one that does the insurance? Like, that's a really interesting model. How does
Yeah,
that work
so
exactly?
there's a few funds that do this. I've run across. I can't remember off the top of my head, but one of the things that I really was interested in is an incubator model surrounded this, right? So what it is the incubator takes the percentage, gives you all these resources, but you're pretty much buying into a pool, right?
Mm,
And it's like maybe like if you put in 5%, 1% goes into the incubator services,
yeah,
right? That's like their fee. But then the
yeah.
4% is like your deleverage risk portfolio, right? So the incubator really masks that what you're talking about, the signaling to investors. You say, oh, this went to this incubator that gave me X amount of resources, mentorship, guidance, and help build this out. But it ultimately, right? You have a buy-in for like 10 different companies or 20 different companies in a pool,
Interesting.
right?
Yeah,
And
that's smart. Yeah,
right.
that's a smart model. I like that. It could still be seen as a bad signal, I think, because I mean, investors are obviously going to look into who your investors
Yeah.
are, and they're going to read about it. So it's like, you can hide it behind the idea of it being an accelerator, but they're still going to see that. But I think it's a smart idea for de-riskifying your time and effort in what you're doing, but also the investors. They're now
Mm.
investing in. I just don't know how legally that works in terms of the trickle down effect. I'm going to look into that after,
Yeah,
because
I think because it comes in the securities law, right? Because the dispersion of it, like how did it get dispersed after? Is it like a dividend payments? Like, how does that work? Like,
Yeah.
that becomes an issue. But I think as a model, as an entrepreneur who's going through the system, it's like when you go through a cohort, especially like a very intimate experience, like an incubator, and you see all these people you graduate with, like 7 out of 10 of those people, their companies don't end up going anywhere. Like they end up flashing out, right? And it happens all the time. And it's cool, like you go back to the drawing board and you get in, or you go and do other things, or sometimes people even join another company that they know, right? Or they want to drive forward. And it's part of seeding the ecosystem. But it's like that whole point is like how to deleverage yourself and maximize being taken care of, right?
Yeah.
And the insurance industry, like the whole purpose of the insurance industry was doing this for like farmers and like people living in rural areas and in disruptive environments, right?
Yeah.
That's what drove that industry for for hundreds of years, right?
Yeah. How do we push that into entrepreneurship?
Yeah, right. Like, how do we push that kind of thinking into entrepreneurship? Because we live in a very risky time to be an entrepreneur, right? Because the risks of not doing it, the risk of not making an income, the risk of losing out on income, right? Kind of shoots you in the foot if you don't have the right fallbacks or the right support or family. Because my issue is, it's not necessarily the entrepreneurs who are doing it now. The people who are doing it now, they're actually part of like I would argue like the one percenters, right? They're the entrepreneurs who are again in the right location, who are in the right time periods, who have the right resources around them, have the right support, right? They just like there's a lot of people out there who might have innovative ideas, who might even have better ideas when it's available, but they just don't have access to the resources or time, or they might have people dependent on them to take care of them, right? They're handicapped by their circumstance, right?
Yeah.
So as a society, it benefits us when we lift the standards, right? So give everyone a more ground zero. So, and one of the things I was really following is Andrew Yang when he was running for U.S. president, right? The Yang Gang, the freedom dividend. He was talking about, $1,000 paycheck to every single American as like a dividend, right? A freedom dividend. And the concept goes back to like Friedman, the 1950s Chicago School of Business, but talking about capitalism, right? We think of capitalism as a zero set game where like it's all about independence and like grit, and like if you can't make it, you don't have it. But not everybody starts as ground zero, right? And the idea behind him was like, if you're doing nothing as a human being right now, you get zero income. Your income is zero, right? But some people have assets behind them. Some people have income coming from those assets. Some people have family support. Some people have all the structure. Other people are handicapped by lack of structure. Having incompetent family or things around them that suck up resources and time from them, right? So it's like if you can set the bar from income zero to income positive, $1,000 a month. It's not enough to completely live off of, but it's like a cushion you can leverage, right, to be a detractor from all the negatives in your life, right? So like at least you have this.
Yeah.
Right. So that kind of thinking becomes really interesting.
Although I don't think, because there's different facets of can you be an entrepreneur, right? In some cases, it's people don't have enough money, and they can't sustain the entrepreneurial lifestyle. I have a few friends who've got full-time jobs working on side hustles on the side, and they're not ready to quit their job because they're not going to be making any money yet with their project. So it's going to take them, maybe double the time that it's going to take me to build something out because I'm doing this, 60, 70 hours a week, right? Whereas they're only working 10, 15 hours. So I agree with that risk factor, but there's also the leap of faith moment where there's a moment in time once you've done the research, once you've talked to enough people and so on, that you need to take that leap of faith. And I think that leap of faith is entrepreneurship, is when you take that risk where you know that what you're doing is either solving a real problem or you are screwed and you're not going to be able to pay the bills, et cetera. You know what I mean? So I think that's entrepreneurship, and not necessarily working on different projects. One ends up working, great, you're going to pursue that. It's taking risks and being bold in those risks. Myself, it's a small risk. I have my family that's been extremely supportive of what I've been doing, and thank God for that. But there are other risks. There are risks within my career, right? I rejected a certain job offers in California, in New York, here in Toronto for this, and because I thought this would be the best way to, start it off. And so everyone's got a risk. Now you just have to see what is your risk appetite, and based that. But I agree, we could find a baseline on insurance for entrepreneurs, but wouldn't that defeat the whole purpose of entrepreneurship? If everyone sort of had a stake in each other's businesses, wouldn't that defeat the idea of like that pride almost of knowing that you went from 0 to 1 as per the book? Falling here, you know what I mean? It's like we all want to go from 1, but a lot of us are going to stay at 0.
Yeah.
So by leveling the playing field and having some form of insurance that benefits all, it might not actually not benefit the one who wins necessarily. Now he's giving up all of his work, and like what's the other criteria? Like, how do you insure in a way the business, right? Is it he failed because he gave up? Is it he failed because he didn't build the right team, or is it he failed because of the customers?
Does he deserve it? Like, yeah, like how do you know they deserve that? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like if he gave up, why? Yeah, okay, so he gave up on something that didn't work because he gave up, but he still gets a part of something that did work because the other one didn't give up, right? So that's where like there's a
becomes tricky, yeah.
Yeah, you know, like how do you define that fine line? And I'm sure some people are going to be just on the wrong side of that. So because or else, you know, I'll start like 10 different businesses. I'll work for 2 months on each of them, get insured by these incubators. Cut them out. Now I've got a little stake in a bunch of companies where one of them might work, you know? You know, and entrepreneurs are good at finding those loopholes. You know, entrepreneurs are the kind of people to go through, you know, your terms and conditions and realize they can get a bunch of free stuff because you didn't pay attention enough. So but it's an interesting thing. I think it's an interesting topic at the end of the day, still, of figuring out how to create that form of insurance for entrepreneurs. And yeah, but my answer to that, you know what, is customer validation. That is your insurance. If your customers love what you are offering, they are your insurance, because you know that at the end of the day, they are still going to be paying for what you're building. And where you can sort of increase that insurance value, if you will, is finding ways to automate the maintenance of those customers. Meaning, you know, can you scale down operations, cut off everything, and still generate revenue with just 2-3 people in the company? Or do you need people to hold on to everything because or else it won't work, right? So I think that's where you can build that insurance is through automation and maintaining everything you've got with your existing clients so that it's almost self-running, you know? That's a tough one. That is definitely a tough one.
I think that's you raised a great point. Absolutely, right? How to retract from vulture capitalism, right? People who just suck resources out of the system.
Yeah.
But yeah, just to wrap things up, man. Like, what can we expect from you in the future? What's coming up?
Well, over the next couple of months, we're keeping it down low in terms of PR these days. But over the next couple of months, we're going to be launching sort of a new integration that allows individual homeowners and property managers to just jump on our platform without us having to go through the whole onboarding process, let's say. And then sometime in March, we're going to start our fundraising for our seed round. So that'll be exciting. I'll share with you sort of the documentation of where we're going with that closer to the dates, but we're going to start that process in March, and I'm excited to get back into that groove, that fundraising groove, once we've proven out a few things.
Perfect, man. Yeah, that sounds great. If you can send a demo over